Somewhere in Arizona, there is gold. Not a rumor of gold, not the dream of gold, real gold. Veins of it, fat and yellow and deep, hidden inside a mountain so violent, so hostile, so alive with heat and thorns and rattlesnakes and sheer vertical rock, that the Apache people who lived in its shadow for centuries called it home to the gods of thunder and death. Somewhere in that mountain, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz found a mine so rich it made him weep. He pulled gold from it, he spent it, he went back, he pulled more. And then, in 1891, he died in a bed in Phoenix, whispering the mine's location to the woman who cared for him. Directions so precise and so tantalizing that she spent the rest of her life trying to find it, and never did. And then the dying started. People have been going into the Superstition Mountains of Arizona looking for Jacob Waltz's mine for over 150 years. Some of them came back empty-handed. Some of them came back changed, haunted, obsessed, ruined. And some of them, more than you would believe, more than any reasonable mountain should be able to account for, did not come back at all. They found them without heads. They found them at the bottom of cliffs. They found them shot with arrows in a land where the Apache wars had ended decades before. They found them as skeletons, bleached by the Arizona sun, with their maps still clenched in their desiccated fists. The mountain took them all. This is not just a treasure hunt. This is not just a folk legend. This is a story about obsession. The obsession that drives ordinary men and women to walk into one of the most dangerous landscapes in North America with nothing but a hand-drawn map and a hunger for gold that overrides every instinct for self-preservation. This is a story about what gold does to people, what the idea of gold does to people. And it is a story about a mountain that has been killing its visitors for a century and a half and has never once apologized. Welcome to the Superstition Mountains. Welcome to the legend of the lost Dutchman's gold mine. Don't say I didn't warn you. You have to understand the Superstition Mountains before you can understand what they do to people who go looking for gold inside them. They rise from the Sonoran Desert east of Phoenix, Arizona. Sudden and dramatic. Not a gentle slope, but a wall, a fortification, a geological declaration that this land is different from the flat desert around it. The highest point is Superstition Mountain itself, at just over 5,000 feet. And the range extends for miles in every direction. A maze of canyons and ridges and box canyons and sheer cliff faces that have confused experienced hikers for generations. The rock is volcanic. The mountains were formed by catastrophic eruptions millions of years ago, and the landscape they left behind is chaotic, irregular, and treacherous in ways that don't reveal themselves until you're deep inside the range and the trail has stopped making sense, and the sun is directly overhead, and you realize that nothing you see looks like anything on your map. The Sonoran Desert that surrounds and fills these mountains is not the romantic golden desert of the movies. It is a living weapon. The saguaro cactus, the tall, armed giants that stand over the landscape like sentries, will lacerate you if you fall against them. The cholla cactus, which locals call jumping cactus with dark humor, has hooked spines that detach from the plant and embed in your skin at the slightest brush, requiring pliers to remove. There are Gila monsters, venomous lizards, and western diamondback rattlesnakes, which are among the most dangerous snakes on the continent. There are mountain lions, there are black widows and brown recluse spiders. And then there is the heat. The Superstition Mountains in summer reach temperatures that are not survivable without significant water and shelter. 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the open air. Rock surfaces so hot they will blister skin on contact. A sun so intense and so relentless that even experienced desert hikers have been killed by dehydration after missing a single water source. The mountains are beautiful, savagely, ruthlessly beautiful. At sunrise, The rock glows amber and rust and deep red, and the saguaros stand in silhouette against a sky that is the most electric blue you have ever seen. At sunset, the whole range turns the color of burning copper, and you understand why people have called this place sacred, have called it the home of gods, have traveled from the other side of the world to stand in its shadow. And then the sun goes down, and the temperature drops 40 degrees in an hour, and the coyotes start, and somewhere in the dark, something moves in the brush, and you remember that beautiful and deadly are not opposites. Sometimes they are the same thing, wearing different faces. The Apache, specifically the Western Apache, lived in and around these mountains for centuries. Their relationship with the superstitions was spiritual, not just physical. They believed the mountains were the home of the thunder god, a deity of immense power who protected the range and punished those who came to take from it. They referred to the range with words that translate roughly to the mountain of the crooked top, and to the spiritual danger within it, with language that outsiders interpreted as warning and prohibition. When Spanish conquistadors first arrived in the American Southwest in the 16th and 17th centuries, Apache resistance, fierce, implacable, deeply tied to their knowledge of the land, kept European influence largely out of the superstition range for centuries. The Apache knew every canyon, every water source, every approach. They were on home ground. The Spanish, and later the Mexicans, and later the Americans, were not. The legend of gold in the superstitions almost certainly begins with this period, with Spanish stories of mines worked by Jesuit priests in the 17th and 18th centuries, mines of extraordinary richness that were supposedly lost or hidden when the Jesuits were expelled from the Spanish Empire in 1767. Whether these mines existed, whether they were in the superstitions, whether the stories that made it to later centuries bear any relationship to historical reality, all of this is uncertain. What is certain is that by the time Jacob Waltz arrived in Arizona in the 1860s, the stories were already in circulation. The gold was already legendary. The mountain was already a destination for desperate men with picks and dreams. The Superstition Mountains were ready. They had been practicing, for centuries, the art of consuming the people who came looking for what they held. His name was Jacob Waltz, and he was not Dutch. This is the first and most persistent confusion in this entire story. The Dutchman of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine was German. In 19th century American slang, Dutch was often used loosely to refer to anyone of Germanic origin. Deutsch, the German word for German, sounded like Dutch to American ears, and the confusion became permanent. Jacob Waltz was born in Germany around 1808, though the exact year and place are uncertain. He immigrated to America and drifted westward, as so many restless European immigrants did in the mid-19th century, pulled by the gravitational field of Western expansion and the recurring promise of land and mineral wealth. He was a miner. He had experience with hard rock mining, the brutal, patient work of following ore veins into mountain stone. He worked mines in various Western territories. He was in California during the gold rush years. He drifted through New Mexico and Arizona as those territories opened to American settlement after the Mexican-American War. By 1863, he was in Arizona. He filed for citizenship in Prescott, Arizona Territory in that year, one of the formal markers we have of his presence. He was in his mid-50s by this point, old for a miner, old for the frontier life, but still possessed of the stubborn physical endurance that mining demands. He homesteaded outside Phoenix, in the Salt River Valley, where he grew vegetables and kept bees and lived the outwardly modest life of a desert farmer. He was, by most accounts, a quiet man. Not unfriendly, but private. He had the watchful, self-contained quality of someone who has learned to keep his own counsel. What his neighbors noticed, what made Jacob Waltz worth noticing, what transformed a German immigrant farmer into a legend, was the gold. Not often, not showily, but periodically, when Waltz needed money, he would appear in Phoenix with gold ore, high-quality gold ore. Sometimes raw chunks of it. He would convert it to cash. purchase what he needed, supplies, equipment, occasionally whiskey, and disappear again into the desert to the east. Where was it coming from? People asked. Waltz didn't answer, or he answered in ways that were vague and slightly different each time, as if he were testing which story people would accept. He mentioned the mountains to the east, the superstitions. He hinted at a mine. He was careful never to be followed, reportedly taking elaborate routes through the desert when returning from his mine, doubling back, waiting in concealment to see if anyone tracked him. He was, in retrospect, a man who was conducting a private negotiation with his own secret. He knew what he had. He knew what it was worth, not just in money, but in the dangerous attention of other men who wanted what he had. He protected his secret the way a man protects his life, because in the Arizona desert, in the 1870s and 1880s, that was often what it amounted to. The stories about how Waltz found the mine, and there are many, and they contradict each other, generally involve a Mexican family named Peralta. The Peralta family in these stories was a wealthy Mexican mining family who had worked a spectacularly rich gold mine in the Superstitions before the American acquisition of the territory. In various versions of the legend, Waltz either befriended a Peralta, rescued a Peralta from death, and was rewarded with the mine's location, received it as a gift from a dying Peralta, or was shown it in exchange for services rendered. The Peralta family is a historical reality. There were prominent Peraltas in Sonora, Mexico, with mining interests. Whether any of them worked a mine in the Superstitions, and whether Jacob Waltz was connected to them, is far less certain. The stories accumulated and elaborated over decades of retelling, growing more specific and more dramatic with each generation. What we can say with some confidence, Jacob Waltz had access to gold that came from somewhere in the general direction of the Superstition Mountains. He was a skilled miner who knew how to find and work ore. He was obsessively secretive about the mine's location. And when he died in 1891, he took the definitive answer with him. That is the tragedy at the center of this story. Not that the gold was lost, but that a man who knew exactly where it was chose to guard that knowledge until his body gave out, and the knowledge died with him, or almost died with him. Here is where the story gets intimate. Here is where the legend brushes up against something that feels, unexpectedly, like a love story. In his final years, Jacob Waltz formed a close friendship with a woman named Julia Thomas. Julia Thomas was a mixed-race woman, black and Hispanic heritage, who ran a small bakery and ice cream shop in Phoenix. She was practical, intelligent, and kind, and she befriended the aging German miner when many others had given up on him as a peculiar eccentric. When Waltz was elderly and his health was failing, Julia Thomas cared for him. She brought him food, she sat with him, she was, in the way of people who show up consistently for the difficult business of being with someone who is diminishing, probably the closest thing to family he had in Arizona. And in 1891, when floodwaters from the Salt River inundated Waltz's property and damaged his health catastrophically, he became ill, probably pneumonia, compounded by the physical stress of the flood. Julia Thomas took him into her home. She nursed him through his final weeks. In those final weeks, Jacob Waltz talked. He told Julia Thomas about the mine. He gave her directions. He described landmarks, a particular rock formation, a canyon, a directional relationship to certain peaks. He drew, some accounts say, a rough map, or at least described something that Julia Thomas later tried to render as a map. The directions, as Julia Thomas recorded them and later shared them, were specific enough to be tantalizing and vague enough to be useless. The kind of directions that make sense if you're standing in the landscape with someone pointing, but that become a riddle when you're trying to decode them from a drawing on paper. Jacob Waltz died on October 25, 1891. He was somewhere around 83 years old. He died in Julia Thomas's home in Phoenix, and Julia Thomas spent the next several years of her life selling her bakery, investing the proceeds, leading expeditions into the superstitions, trying to find what he had told her about. She never found it. She eventually lost all the money she had invested in the search. She spent the rest of her long life. She lived into the 1910s, in modest circumstances, having poured everything she had into a mountain that gave nothing back. But before she gave up, she sold copies of the map, her reconstruction of Waltz's descriptions, to other searchers, for $2 apiece, which was not an insignificant sum. The map spread, and with the map spread the obsession that would define the Superstition Mountains for the next century and beyond. What does it tell us about Jacob Waltz that this is how he spent his last weeks, giving directions, in fragments, to the one person who had been kind to him? Maybe it was generosity, the only real gift he had to give, offered to the woman who was keeping him alive with soup and warmth and company. Maybe it was something else. Maybe even at the end he was still being cagey, still editing, still preserving the essential secret, even while appearing to share it. The directions that made Julia Thomas spend years searching and come up empty, did they reflect a dying man's failing memory, or the last calculated act of a man who had spent a lifetime protecting what was his? We will never know. That is the heart of this legend. The man who knew is gone, and everything we have is interpretation. After Jacob Waltz's death, after Julia Thomas's failed searches and her distribution of maps, the legend entered a new phase: industrialization. The story of the lost Dutchman's mine spread through newspapers, through word of mouth, through the saloons and boarding houses, where men talked about the West's vanishing frontier and the fortunes still waiting to be found. By the early 20th century, it had become one of the most famous treasure legends in America. People came from everywhere. They came from back east, from Europe, from as far as Australia, drawn by stories of Jacob Waltz's gold and armed with various documents claiming to be the authentic map to the mine. The maps multiplied, dozens, eventually hundreds, of documents claiming authority. Many of them were obvious forgeries. Some appeared genuinely old. None of them led to the mine. The expeditions ranged from the amateurish to the elaborately organized. Lone prospectors with burros and pickaxes. Well-funded expeditions with pack animals and supplies for weeks. Former soldiers, former miners, men with geological expertise, men with no expertise whatsoever, but with tremendous conviction and nothing left to lose. The mountain took them with democratic impartiality. The deaths in the superstitions attributed to the lost Dutchman search, and this is where the story darkens definitively, where it transforms from a fascinating legend into something with real blood in it, began within years of Jacob Waltz's death, and have not stopped since. Let me walk you through the most significant. Adolf Ruth, 1931. This case is perhaps the most famous and most disturbing of all the Superstition Mountain deaths, and it deserves its own section. But first, let us note the pattern of disappearances and deaths that preceded and surrounded it. In the early decades of the 20th century, multiple searchers reported being shot at in the superstitions. Some reported being followed, watched, driven away. There were stories, some credible, some less so, of claim jumpers, of violent confrontations between competing searchers, of men who went into the mountains with maps and did not come out. The superstitions during this period had a reputation that functioned as both warning and advertisement. The more people died there, the more the legend grew. The more the legend grew, the more people came. The more people came, the more some of them died. It was a perfect, terrible feedback loop, and the mountain sat in the center of it, indifferent and immovable, and full of secrets. Adolf Ruth was 66 years old when he went into the Superstition Mountains in June of 1931. He should not have gone alone. He should not have gone in June, the beginning of the Sonoran Desert's killing season, when temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees. He should not have gone at all, because he walked with a cane from an old injury, and the superstitions are not a place for a 66-year-old man with a cane in the summer heat. He went anyway. Adolph Ruth was a retired veterinarian from Washington, D.C., and he was convinced, with the absolute unshakable conviction of a man who has found something precious, that he had the authentic map to the lost Dutchman's mine. The map had come through a circuitous route involving a Mexican family, land transactions in Texas, and years of private research that Ruth had conducted with the seriousness of a scholar and the passion of a true believer. His son, Erwin Ruth, had arranged for the expedition and initially accompanied his father to the trailhead, where local ranchers, the Taylors, who ran cattle in the area, helped Adolph get settled at a base camp. Then Erwin left. He had business obligations. He expected his father to emerge from the mountains within a week or two. Adolph Ruth did not emerge. By late July, when he had been overdue for weeks, his son contacted Arizona authorities. A search was organized. Men went into the mountains calling his name, looking for his camp, following the trails he might have taken. They found his camp. They found some of his equipment. They found no Adolph Ruth. Months passed. In December 1931, 6 months after Adolph Ruth had walked into the Superstitions, hikers discovered a human skull in a remote canyon in the range. It took time to confirm the identification. The skull was Adolph Ruth's. Then, in January 1932, more of his remains were found nearby. The skeleton was scattered. Animals had been at it over the months, but enough remained for examination. And the examination produced something that has haunted this case for nearly a century. The skull had 2 bullet holes in it. 2 distinct, clear perforations in the cranium, in a pattern consistent with gunshot wounds. Not one wound, which might be explained as accidental, as a ricochet, as some kind of terrible mishap. 2 wounds. The Maricopa County coroner initially ruled the death a homicide. 2 bullet holes in a man's skull, in a remote mountain where he'd been searching for a famous gold mine, suggested strongly that someone had shot him twice, and left him to be found only as bones months later. The case was investigated, and the investigation produced something else disturbing. A handwritten note found with Ruth's belongings at the camp that appeared to say, Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, in Latin. Written, apparently, by Ruth himself, as if he had found the mine. Did Adolph Ruth find the lost Dutchman's mine? Was he killed because of what he found? Was the note genuine? Was it placed there by someone else? The coroner's ruling was later revised. The official conclusion became, and remains, that Adolph Ruth died of a heart attack, perhaps from the heat and exertion, and that the bullet holes in his skull might have been caused by something other than gunfire, or that the skull had been moved or tampered with before discovery. But the revisions satisfied no one who had followed the case closely. The bullet holes were real, the note was real, and a 66-year-old man who had gone into the mountains convinced he had the mine's location had come out only as bones 6 months later. The investigation into Adolph Ruth's death was representative of how the Superstition Mountain deaths have been handled, consistently, across a century, with initial alarm, subsequent confusion, and eventual reclassification into something less disturbing than the evidence suggests. This is the pattern. Someone goes into the mountains looking for the lost Dutchman's mine. They do not come back. When the body is eventually found, sometimes days later, sometimes months, sometimes years, there are questions. The nature of the death is ambiguous. The official ruling tends toward accident. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, a fall, even when the evidence presents complications. Is this because the deaths are genuinely accidental, in a mountain range that is legitimately one of the most dangerous landscapes in the American Southwest? Absolutely. People die of heat exhaustion and dehydration, and falls and snake bites in the Superstitions every year, whether they're looking for gold or just hiking. The mountains are dangerous regardless of your intentions. Or is it? And here is the question that has dogged every serious investigation of the superstition deaths. Is it because someone or something is actively protecting the mine from discovery? Let's look at the broader pattern of deaths and disappearances associated with the lost Dutchman search. The numbers are difficult to verify precisely. Different researchers count differently, and the line between died in the superstitions and died searching for the mine is often blurry. But conservative estimates suggest that more than 100 people have died in the Superstition Mountains since the early 20th century, with dozens of those deaths occurring under circumstances that raised questions never fully answered. Several cases stand out. The decapitated bodies, 1947. Two prospectors, James Cravey and a companion, went into the Superstitions in 1947. James Cravey was found dead, decapitated, his head separated from his body. The official explanation was that his head had been removed by animals after his death. It is also deeply disturbing and consistent with a pattern of Superstition Mountain deaths, in which the condition of the remains makes definitive cause of death determination difficult or impossible. Barry Storm, 1930s. Barry Storm was a prospector and writer who went into the Superstitions multiple times in the 1930s and wrote a book about his experiences. He claimed that on one expedition he was shot at by an unknown sniper, a volley of rifle fire that came from the ridgeline above him. He survived. He wrote about it. Was he shot at by a territorial miner protecting a claim? By someone who mistook him for game? By his own imagination amplified by heat and fear? His account remains in the record, unverified. Various disappearances. Throughout the mid-20th century, people who entered the Superstitions looking for the mine simply disappeared. Some were found eventually. Some were never found at all. The desert is large. The canyons are deep. A human body in the Arizona summer can be reduced to scattered bones within weeks. The investigations into these deaths share a common feature. They were hampered by the terrain, by the time elapsed between death and discovery, and by the fundamental difficulty of determining what happened to someone who died alone in a remote location before any witness could observe it. What they produced, collectively, was not resolution, but accumulation. Layer upon layer of unanswered questions, piled on top of the original unanswered question of Jacob Waltz's mine, creating a structure of mystery so thick and so old that it began to feel, to the people who studied it, almost geological in its density. If the Superstition Mountain deaths are not all accidental, and there is legitimate reason to consider this, then who or what is responsible? The theories have accumulated alongside the deaths. Let us go through the most compelling. Suspect 1. The Apache, then and now. The most historically persistent explanation for violence in the Superstitions has been Apache protection of a sacred site. The Apache belief that the Superstition Mountains were the home of the thunder god, and that the mountains should not be mined or desecrated, was real and documented. Apache resistance to encroachment on their territory, including violence against trespassers, was real and documented. In the earlier period of the search, from the 1860s through the 1890s, Apache attacks on prospectors in the Superstitions were a genuine, documented danger. Men were killed by Apache in the mountains during this period. This is not legend, it is history. But the Apache Wars effectively ended by the 1890s. The Apache were on reservations. The kind of organized armed resistance that characterized the earlier period was no longer possible. However, and this is the part that later theorists have found intriguing, some researchers have proposed that individual Apache families or groups maintained a covert, ongoing protective presence in the Superstitions long after the official end of the Apache Wars. That descendants of those original protectors continued, quietly, for generations, to discourage, sometimes violently, those who came looking for the mine. This theory is unproven. The San Carlos Apache tribe, when asked about it, has consistently denied any organized effort to protect the mine through violence. But the theory persists, because it is the explanation that makes the most cultural and historical sense for certain of the deaths, particularly the earlier ones. Suspect 2. Claim jumpers and territorial miners. The second major suspect is entirely human and entirely mercenary: other gold hunters. The Superstition Mountains have attracted, over the decades, not just innocent seekers, but also predatory ones. Men who followed other searchers into the mountains, waited for them to find something, and then take it, eliminating the discoverer to prevent any claim being filed. This theory, of miner-on-miner violence, of claim jumping elevated to murder, is consistent with the broader history of American mining culture. The gold rush and the silver rushes and the subsequent decades of Western mining produced a subculture in which violence over mineral claims was not uncommon, in which isolated locations and the absence of law enforcement made murder a viable business strategy. In the superstitions, where the prize is theoretically greater than any ordinary claim, the incentive for this kind of violence would be correspondingly greater. Suspect 3. The mountain itself. The explanation that is not really an explanation at all, but that hovers over this entire story like heat shimmer over desert rock. The mountain itself is the suspect. Not the Apache, not claim jumpers, the mountain, the terrain, the heat, the thirst, the disorientation that comes from hours in a landscape of bewildering sameness, where every canyon looks like every other canyon, and the sun erases all shadow, and the certainty of your direction evaporates along with your sweat. Most of the deaths in the superstitions are in clinical reality, environmental. Heat kills, dehydration kills, falls from volcanic rock kill, snake bites kill, getting lost in a canyon system that goes in every direction but the one you need kills. The mountain does not need a guardian. It has the sun. It has the absence of water. It has the geography of confusion. It kills people all by itself, with the calm efficiency of a natural process that has been operating for millions of years, and has no interest whatsoever in whether you find the gold or not. This is the explanation that satisfies scientists and park rangers and desert survival instructors. It is deeply, demonstrably true. And yet, it does not account for the bullet holes in Adolf Ruth's skull. It does not account for the decapitated bodies. It does not account for Barry Storm's snipers on the ridge. The mountain, it seems, sometimes has help. The damage done by the lost Dutchman's mine legend is not confined to people who die in the superstitions. The mine has destroyed lives at a distance, in living rooms and bank accounts and marriages, in the quiet rooms where obsession does its most thorough work. The history of the lost Dutchman search is littered with people who did not die in the mountains, but were consumed by the search regardless. Julia Thomas, as we've noted, spent all she had and came up empty. Sims Ely, a writer and searcher who devoted decades to the legend, chronicled his own obsession with the uncomfortable clarity of a man who knows he is trapped by something he cannot put down. His book, The Lost Dutchman Mine, published in 1953, is one of the foundational texts of the legend, and it reads partly as a love letter to the mystery, and partly as a confession. There have been partnerships formed and broken over the mine. There have been lawsuits, actual legal proceedings in actual courts, over claimed rights to information about the mine's location, over contested maps and alleged agreements to share findings. The legal conflicts around the Lost Dutchman legend fill files in Arizona courthouses and tell a story of human greed and hope and betrayal that is entirely mundane and entirely sad. There have been families, children who grew up with an absent father or mother because the mine took a parent's attention for decades. There have been retirements spent searching, savings depleted, relationships sacrificed on the altar of this particular obsession. The mine has an economy of its own strange kind. Books about it, tours in Superstition Mountain State Park that stop at landmarks associated with the legend, annual treasure hunts, merchandise, a whole ecosystem of interest that sustains itself regardless of whether the mine exists. And in the middle of this economy of legend, actual people are still going into the mountains, right now, today, with whatever maps they've acquired and whatever theories they've developed, and whatever mixture of rational expectation and pure unkillable hope they carry into the desert. The mountain receives them all. Now we arrive at the question beneath all the other questions. Does the lost Dutchman's mine actually exist? Let us be precise about what is being doubted and what is not. Jacob Waltz was real. The gold he brought to Phoenix was real. There are enough contemporaneous accounts to make this beyond serious dispute. The gold came from somewhere. That somewhere was, by Waltz's own account, in the direction of the Superstition Mountains. So the question is not whether Jacob Waltz had access to a gold source. The question is whether that gold source was a mine in the Superstitions, and whether it is still there to be found. The case for existence. The geology of the Superstition Mountains is consistent with the presence of gold deposits. The volcanic rock of the range contains hydrothermal veins, the kind of geological features associated with gold and silver mineralization. This is not speculation. It is documented by geologists who have studied the range. There is gold in those mountains. The question of whether there is a specific, extraordinarily rich deposit, a mine of the kind Waltz described, is harder to answer definitively. But it is not geologically impossible. It is in fact geologically plausible. The Peralta family connection, the story of Mexican miners who worked the mountains before American acquisition, also has a grounding in historical fact. The Peralta family was real. Mexican mining operations in the pre-American Arizona territory were real. Whether any such operations included a mine of legendary richness in the Superstitions is uncertain. But the basic framework is not historical fantasy. And there is the Peralta stone maps, a set of stone tablets discovered in 1949, allegedly bearing Spanish-language maps and descriptions of the Superstition mine in a language and format consistent with 17th or 18th century Spanish colonial mining practice. The stone maps were analyzed by experts who could not definitively establish either their authenticity or their fraudulence. They remain a subject of intense debate. The case against existence. 150 years of intensive searching by thousands of people, including professional geologists and experienced miners, has produced no verifiable discovery of the mine. This is significant. The Superstition Mountains are large, but not infinite. Modern search technology, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, aerial surveys has been applied to the range. Professional mining companies with access to sophisticated geological analysis have assessed the area. If there were a mine of the described richness, a mother lode of truly exceptional scale, it seems likely that some portion of this searching would have found at least its traces. Unless it is genuinely that well hidden. Unless the descriptions are coded, or wrong, or were always insufficient. Unless Waltz himself was describing it in terms of landmarks that have changed in the intervening century. Floods, rockfalls, and vegetation changes can dramatically alter desert landscapes. Or unless, and this is the most deflationary possibility, Waltz did not find a mine at all. What if he found gold? Yes, but gold in small placer deposits scattered through the mountains, the kind that can sustain occasional prospecting without concentrating into a mineable lode. What if the mine is a story he told, or allowed others to tell about him, because it was more useful, more protective of his actual somewhat modest source than the truth would have been? What if the lost Dutchman's mine is a magnificent, accidental, century-old misunderstanding? The people who died in the Superstitions looking for it would find no comfort in that possibility. After more than a century of research, some amateur, some professional, some scholarly, several dominant theories about the lost Dutchman's mine have emerged. Theory 1. The mine exists and is located in a specific canyon. The most popular theory among active searchers, and the one that drives most current expeditions, holds that the mine is real, that it is in a specific location within the Superstitions, and that it has not been found simply because the landscape has changed enough since Waltz's time to make his directions misleading. Researchers in this camp have developed highly specific theories about location. The most frequently cited candidates include Weaver's Needle, a spectacular volcanic spire that serves as the primary landmark in most Dutchman lore, and its immediate surroundings, and various canyons in the eastern and northern sections of the range. The challenge with this theory is that these specific locations have been searched exhaustively by multiple expeditions and have yielded nothing. Theory 2, the Peralta mine and the Dutchman's mine are the same. This theory holds that Jacob Waltz did not discover a new mine, but rather relocated an existing one, specifically the mine worked by the Peralta family before American territorial expansion. The Peralta stone maps, in this theory, are genuine and point to the same location as Waltz's mine. Supporters of this theory find a kind of narrative elegance in the idea. One great mine, two legendary discoveries, separated by generations of violence and secrecy. Theory 3. The mine was exhausted or collapsed. Some researchers propose that the mine exists, that it was real and rich, but that it is no longer accessible, either because Waltz himself exhausted the gold-bearing vein, or because subsequent decades of flash flooding and seismic activity in the mountains have collapsed the mine shaft or covered its entrance. This theory would explain why no one has found it, because in its original accessible form, it no longer exists. Theory 4. The mine was never in the Superstitions. A minority but persistent theory holds that Jacob Waltz's mine was not in the Superstition Mountains at all, that Waltz used the Superstitions as deliberate misdirection, while his actual source was in the Four Peaks Range to the north, or the Goldfield Mountains to the west, or somewhere else in the broader Apache Junction area. If this theory is correct, then a century of searching in the Superstitions has been looking in exactly the wrong place. Theory 5. It was never a mine. The most skeptical theory, held by some historians, is that Waltz was bringing gold to Phoenix that he had obtained through other means, buying it, trading for it, acquiring it from sources that had nothing to do with a personal mine, and that the mine was a fiction he maintained, either for privacy, for status, or because the truth of where the gold came from was something he could not publicly acknowledge. This theory accounts for all the gold, the secrecy, and the failure to find the mine. It is also, narratively speaking, the least satisfying possible conclusion to one of America's great legends. I want to stop here, before the call to action, and just sit with something. The Lost Dutchman's mine legend is usually told as an adventure story, a treasure hunt, a puzzle waiting to be solved by the right combination of intelligence, luck, and determination. It is told with the exciting, forward-leaning energy of pursuit. But I want to tell it a different way for a moment. I want to tell it as a story of what was taken. Not the gold, not the mine. What the mountain took, and what the legend took. It took Adolf Ruth, 66 years old, who walked into the desert in June heat with a cane and a map, and a conviction that he had solved the puzzle, and who came out only as bones in a canyon, months later, with bullet holes in his skull. It took the years of Julia Thomas's life, years she could not afford to spend, financially or temporally, chasing directions given to her by a dying man who may have been protecting his secret, even in the act of seeming to share it. It took the unnamed searchers, the ones whose deaths didn't make the newspapers, who went in alone and did not come back, and whose families waited and wondered, and eventually stopped hoping. It took marriages and savings and retirements, and decades of people's irreplaceable time, spent in pursuit of something that may or may not exist, in a mountain range that is beautiful and deadly in equal measure. What does a legend owe the people it consumes? Nothing. Legends owe nothing. They simply exist, compelling and indifferent, drawing people in by the oldest human instinct there is, the hunger to find what is hidden, to claim what is unclaimed, to solve what has not been solved. That instinct is in us all. It is not stupid, and it is not pathological, and the people who went into the superstitions were not fools. They were human beings doing the most human thing there is, reaching for something that seemed just barely, almost nearly possible. Jacob Waltz, if he is watching from wherever old German miners go when they die, might be the only person in this story who got what he wanted. He found his mine. He kept his secret. He lived his own life by his own rules in a landscape that rewarded the self-sufficient and punished the careless. He died in a warm bed, cared for by someone who was kind to him. He won. The mountain won. The rest of them, Julia Thomas and Adolph Ruth and Barry Storm and every other searcher who has spent their days in those canyons, they played the game by the rules the mountains set, and the mountains set the rules so they could not win. And yet, here is the thing that will not let this legend rest. Here is the thing that explains why people are still going into the superstitions right now, today, as you watch this video. The mine might be real. Not probably, maybe, but possibly, and possibility in the mathematics of obsession counts for everything. Somewhere in those volcanic canyons, between the saguaros and the rattlesnakes and the killing summer heat, there might be a shaft in the rock with a vein of gold in it that has been waiting since Jacob Waltz last touched it in the 1880s, waiting through all the decades of searching, hidden by a rockfall or a flood, or simply by the impenetrable complexity of a mountain that offers 10,000 canyons, and only one of them is the right one. And the next person who goes in might be the one who finds it. That is the cruelty and the beauty of this legend simultaneously. The possibility is real enough to be worth dying for in the eyes of those who go looking. The mountain has decided that this is sufficient reason to receive them all. Come, the mountain says, bring your map. Bring your water and your boots and your certainty. I'll be here. I've always been here. I'm not going anywhere. The Superstition Mountains are a state park now. You can hike there, legally and safely, on marked trails, with water sources and rangers, and all the apparatus of modern outdoor recreation. More than 100,000 people visit every year. Most of them come back. But the legend doesn't live in the marked trails. It lives in the unmapped canyons, in the places where the trails end and the rock begins, in the shadows under the ridgelines where no ranger goes. The search continues. There are people right now, with modern GPS, with geological analysis software, with decades of accumulated research, who are convinced they know where the mine is. Some of them are quietly planning their next expedition. Some of them are in the mountains now. The Dutchman's gold waits. Or it doesn't. And that uncertainty, after 150 years, is the only answer any of us have. You just heard the story of the lost Dutchman's gold mine. One of America's most enduring, most deadly, most genuinely mysterious legends. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking about Arizona. You're thinking about the Superstition Mountains. You're thinking about the fact that the mine has not been found, which means it could still be found, which means, stop. I'm saying this with genuine care. The Superstition Mountains kill people. Every year, people die in that mountain range. The heat is real, the terrain is real, the danger is real. If the lost Dutchman's mine legend calls to you, and I understand why it does, because it's called to me too, sitting here researching this story. Please, please take that call seriously before you act on it. Go to the Superstition Mountains if you want to. The Lost Dutchman State Park is extraordinary. The hiking is world-class. The landscape is unlike anything else on Earth. But bring water, more than you think you need. Go with someone. Tell people where you're going. Respect the desert. Respect the mountain. The gold will still be there, if it's there at all, when you're prepared. It has been waiting since the 1880s. It can wait another season. Now, to those of you who've been on this channel from the beginning, thank you. You are why we do this. You are why we spend weeks in archives and historical records and academic papers, trying to find the human truth inside the legend, trying to give these stories the weight they deserve. If this video moved you, if you found yourself leaning forward, if the story got under your skin the way a great story should, subscribe, hit the bell, share this video with one person who you think needs to hear it. Every subscribe, every share, every comment tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling matters, that history matters, that the human beings inside every mystery, Jacob Waltz, Julia Thomas, Adolf Ruth, every unnamed searcher who left bones in those canyons, matter. Drop a comment below. Tell me, do you believe the mine is real? Do you think someone found it and is keeping quiet? Do you think Jacob Waltz was protecting a secret he never truly meant to share? I read every comment, and the conversations in the comments section of this channel are some of the best discussions on the internet. Join them. And if you want to go deeper, the Lost Dutchman's Mine has generated a remarkable body of literature. Sims Ely's The Lost Dutchman Mine, T.E. Glover's research on the Peralta connection, the academic work on the Peralta stone maps. The archive of the Arizona Historical Society has primary documents related to Jacob Waltz and Julia Thomas that are genuinely fascinating to read. Go look, read the original sources. Come back and tell me what you found. Because the thing about a legend this old and this alive is that it doesn't belong to any single storyteller. It belongs to everyone who has ever looked at a mountain and wondered what was inside it. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt the pull of the impossible and walked toward it anyway. It belongs to you. Next time on this channel, we go somewhere else. Somewhere just as strange, just as dark, just as haunted by the collision of human desire and human vulnerability. Stay curious. Stay careful. And whatever you do, watch where you put your boots when you're walking in the desert. Arizona is beautiful, but it bites. The mountain doesn't call to everyone, but to those it calls, it speaks in a language older than gold. The language of the thing just out of reach, the thing almost visible, the thing that makes all your ordinary life feel like waiting.